So I'd say at this point, there really was no such thing as too much Scream. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel and another installment in my Scream review series, where I talk all the Scream movies in the lead up to the new film, and today we're talking about Scream 2. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this movie were, if you already saw it, or if you were planning on seeing it, and make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my content out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews of new releases, older films, hidden gems, and so much more on a near daily basis. But let's jump right into it, and let's talk about Scream 2. This once again stars Neve Campbell as Sidney Prescott, who's getting acclimated to college life. But 2 years after the first series of murders, someone donning the Ghostface costume begins a new string of killings. So, as I've done previously with my reviews of older films, this will get into spoiler territory. So, if you haven't seen Scream 2 by now, and you wish to know nothing, this is your spoiler warning. Go watch the movie, then come back to this. But anyway, here we go. Once again written by Kevin Williamson and directed by Wes Craven, this was fast-tracked into production while the original film was still in theaters, as Williamson did provide a rough outline for a sequel when auctioning his script for the first movie. And the first Scream was such a hit that other actors wanted in on the fun, with Sarah Michelle Gellar in particular joining the cast without even reading the script and simply going off the first film's success as her motivation to join. Plus, Dimension Films wanted it out just a year after the original film was released to capitalize on that success once more, a deadline that was met despite some setbacks, which we'll get into in a little bit. And like that first movie, this once again combines a slasher film with a murder whodunit, along with bits of dark comedy, though I still wouldn't call this a horror comedy, but this time around, mainly going after the cliches being used in sequels. It's one of those films that mostly offers more of the same, but primarily to its advantage, and for some, this was even deemed superior to the original movie. Now, I don't quite think that. I still think the first film has the edge on this, but I can see where people get that from. This does what all good sequels are supposed to do and expand the scope of the original, but it also does a great job of maintaining a tonal consistency with it. While it takes place 2 years later, it truly feels like the natural continuation of these characters' journeys. It gives us a bit more into their state of minds, and it even takes care of some loose ends from the first movie. When they all reunite, it feels like they don't miss a beat, and with it being released just a year after the first movie, there's still that very strong 90s teen vibe to it, as it looks to emulate the style now made popular by the first movie. So it makes these two films a nice back-to-back double feature. They flow into one another very nicely. Even though this is doing a lot of the same stuff as the first film, it's part of the point and it's part of all the meta commentary involved here. And I'd argue this movie gets considerably more meta this time around, as you now have movies within movies replaying all the events, because Gail, played again by Courtney Cox, writes a book based on what happened in Woodsboro, and it gets adapted into a movie called Stab, with a screening for the movie being the setting for the opening scene. And this is a more creative spin on the setup in the first movie's opening scene. Once again, it's an extended sequence focusing on characters who are indirectly connected to the main characters, but who become Ghostface's first two victims. In this case, it's Jada Pinkett and Omar Epps as Maureen and Phil. And once again, it's another strong opening, and it's a moment that allows the movie to go a little bigger, with Ghostface now attacking in public spots. I'd say unlike the first movie, which was terrifying because at the time we didn't know what to expect, here there's that level of expectation we know what we're going into. So instead, this goes more for an over-the-top vibe, as you have this obnoxious audience cheering over every little thing that's happening in Stab and completely drowning out this serious moment of two characters getting brutally killed. They're losing their minds like someone won the Super Bowl or something, screaming at the top of their lungs and flinging their popcorn around and waving toy knives. And while Phil is killed in the bathroom, Maureen's killed right in the theater. And yet what happens is this crowd is so immersed in this theatrical experience that they think it's all part of an act, as they stare at her standing above them after having been stabbed by Ghostface. It's an admittedly ridiculous moment, but it's one that knows what it is and goes all in on it, being incredibly creative and innovative in its execution, no pun intended, and once again establishing that no one is safe. And it also plays nicely into this recurring theme that we hear brought up multiple times throughout the film regarding people's obsession with violence, especially in the movies, which by now is an extremely tired discussion, but was especially a big topic of conversation at the time.
You can't blame real-life violence on entertainment.
What? Wait a second. Yes, you can. Don't you even watch the news?
Yeah, hello. The murderer was wearing a ghost mask, okay? Just like in the movie, it's directly responsible.
No, it's not.
And going back to that idea that this movie knows what it is, that's a huge part of its plot, probably even more than the first movie. Not that the first film didn't have scenes of characters essentially acknowledging they're in a horror movie, because there was plenty of that, but there was also a little bit of build-up before everyone but Randy came to terms with it. Here, everyone's a lot more open about that idea, mostly from the start, with Sidney taking note how this harkens back to Woodsboro right from her opening scene, and a lot of the conversations revolve around her repeat motivations in sequels or things done differently in sequels. There's even an extended conversation at one point in a film class about which sequels are even better than their originals, which Randy has with Sarah Michelle Gellar's Cece, which I think gives a slight indication that this movie thinks it can be better than the original.
Many sequels have surpassed their original.
Oh, yeah? Aliens. Far better than the first.
T2. The Godfather, Part 2.
And going back to Sidney for a moment, once again, she's as great as ever. Neve Campbell gives arguably an even better performance this time around. I mean, the character was certainly a little self-aware during the first movie as she took jabs at the genre and was always considerably more alert than your average horror protagonist. But here, now that she knows how to stay ahead and what traps to especially avoid, it makes her arguably even more cunning. Now, she's not flawless. Like some of the other characters, she winds up making some decisions that end up being costly for others, like her boyfriend Derek, played by Jerry O'Connell, or her friend Hallie, played by Elise Neal, but she mostly knows how to stay one step ahead and knows what to look out for, while still dealing with some personal baggage left over from the first film and some trust issues that it makes her a compelling protagonist once more. And that personal baggage especially comes in the form of Cotton Weary, played again by Liev Schreiber, going from a character we see for just 2 seconds on the TV screen in the first movie to now being a main character here, having been exonerated for Sidney's mother's death and now wanting a national TV spot to tell his side of the story. We see initially he's used by Gail to try boosting her notoriety some more, and after that fails, he goes on his own and tries to hound Sidney to work something out among themselves.
We're talking prime time, Sid. You, me, and Diane Sawyer.
Cotton, I can't.
Which was a well-done storyline mainly for Liev Schreiber's charismatic performance that still oh so slightly conveyed that Cotton is a bit off. Like, it's not quite as on the nose as the creepiness of some of the characters in the first Scream, like Billy, but they do a good job of showing a guy who's just a bit eccentric and obsessive. That's not to the point that he becomes a villain, but you can see why he'd give off a little bit of those killer vibes, even though he's not necessarily one of the bad guys himself. Though a little bit of a jerk, with not everything he does having the most noble intentions, considering certain decisions he makes here stem from his desire to work out a TV deal.
Bet you that Diane Sawyer interview's looking real good right about now.
Consider it done.
So there's always that tension hanging over some of his scenes that maybe he might suddenly flip if there's a situation he sees as beneficial to him. And while this is a more of the same film to a degree, I'd say that at the same time, it gives this a more unpredictable nature to it, where it doubles down on the no one's safe mentality, and you have characters like Cotton who might turn on one another at the drop of a dime. So I think it gives the film an extra layer of tension as you really don't know who the killer is, as opposed to the obvious reveal of Billy Loomis being the killer. Here, there's much more of an all bets are off feel, and it was harder to see certain reveals coming, which was nice. But now you also have all these characters who are considerably more self-aware now, driving the movie forward, without just Randy, played again by Jamie Kennedy, acting as that audience surrogate, which in some ways made it alright that they killed the guy off halfway through the movie, which to me was the most shocking moment here. The guy who knew the rules the most and was careful to avoid falling into traps now found himself the victim of one of the killers.
Manson, Bundy, OJ,
While in some ways I get it, it's still a moment I'm slightly disappointed with. One, for the fact that Randy was one of my favorite characters, and two, for the way it plays out, as he was with Gail and Dewey when he gets a phone call from the killer, and they make the mistake of leaving him by himself, which makes him an open target. And I thought that was a really dumb move. But considering it happened right out in the open, it at least plays even further into that idea that, again, no one's safe. Now, as I said, even though it's not quite as obvious this time around who's the killer, the rest of the movie otherwise, like I said, in terms of pure structure, it does play a little bit into that more of the same feel. But for the most part, it works, because most big-name horror sequels do utilize a more of the same approach. And here, part of the killer's motives are essentially recreating Woodsboro beat by beat. And because of those two combined elements, like I said, this approach works here, as it allows characters to attempt planning ahead and trying to get the one up on the killers. On that same note, there are some plot points that felt a bit too rehashed from the original. Like, there's a subplot where Sidney's boyfriend Derek, who's considerably nicer than Billy, is suspected to be the killer, mainly by Dewey. And there are also a lot of the same beats when it comes to Dewey and Gale's arcs, which I wasn't exactly keen on, considering I wasn't the biggest fan of where they took those characters in the first movie. Like, once again, Gale, despite being played up towards the end as a more sympathetic figure, goes back to her narcissistic, mean-spirited ways, and she's barking orders at her cameraman, she's insulting other journalists, and despite helping out Sidney at the end of the last movie, she treats her especially so callously, trying to exploit her for a TV spot. And I like how they at least kept some consistency with her character, as it shows that just because she's helpful at the end of the last movie doesn't mean she's exactly a noble character all of a sudden, but it doesn't make me suddenly like her more. But the one thing I will say is that due to this particular arc, it actually did allow me to like Dewey more this time around, because I thought he was a little too whiny in the last movie, and we see a little bit of that here. But what I liked was how Gale talks so poorly about him in her book, and she insults his intelligence, that we actually get a little mini arc where he's really offended by that, and he talks about how he's perceived as not being all that smart and how it hurts him. I think it gives the character a lot more humanity, which I found refreshing, and I think David Arquette's performance here is better than in the first movie. I just didn't like how later on we once again get this unrealistic relationship blossoming between Gale and Dewey, and they sneak off together, and it results in Dewey getting stabbed and left for dead. Again. That was a bit weak in my opinion. I wish something different was done there. Now, I also want to go back to something brought up earlier on, and that's the fact that this film was rushed into production and managed to still be released a year after the first movie. And that was even after the script initially leaked, where the killers were revealed, causing Williamson to go back and rewrite it. Now, that's both impressive, yet it winds up being a slight disadvantage as well. Mainly when it comes to the reveal. So, the mastermind behind all of this is revealed to be Billy's mother, Mrs. Loomis, played by Laurie Metcalf, who wants revenge for her son's death, and she's seen throughout the movie masquerading as a journalist named Debbie Salt who idolizes Gale. And that entire reveal was great, and it gives a new motivation to the killers as opposed to the first movie, where this time around she just wants pure revenge. But in the initial script, Mrs. Loomis's accomplices were both Hallie and Derek, who would both be revealed to be lovers and two people wanting fame for the murders after they got caught. After the script leak, it was changed to another friend of Sidney's named Mickey, played by Timothy Oliphant, who has the same motivation of wanting to become famous after getting caught for the murders, who has the same motivation of wanting to be famous after getting caught for the murders. But unfortunately, this reveal doesn't quite work as well, if you ask me. Now, I like the idea behind both reveals of someone saying they want all this fame after the murders because of this recurring theme that I mentioned earlier regarding the obsession with violence. And I understand why there was a need for a change given the leaks and wanting to keep the ending a surprise. But this particular person just doesn't work as well though, I think. Because if the reveal would have been left to both Hallie and Derek, while I wouldn't have been so keen on once again having Sidney's boyfriend be one of the killers, it would have at least hit a little harder emotionally, considering these were people who we spend most of the movie with. And they were clearly very close to Sidney. But Mickey, while in the same friend group, is mostly a throwaway character who we wind up not seeing for a good part of the movie's second half before the big reveal. Like, at one point, I almost forgot about him, and he's gone for a while before he's revealed to be one of the killers. And I mean, don't get me wrong, Timothy Oliphant plays it very over the top, and I liked how the rest of the final act went. It's not even like I dislike the motivations, as I said. I'm just saying that it doesn't quite hit as hard on an emotional level, given this isn't a character we spend as much time with. Even with my criticisms regarding how obvious it was that Billy was one of the killers in the first movie, it's at least an emotionally resonant one because it's a character we've seen all throughout the film. And I'd still say this film ended on a strong note and it was a really fun third act overall, and this criticism didn't negatively affect the movie to the point that I disliked it or anything. I just say that I wish they pushed things back when they decided to do a rewrite, and at the very least expanded on Mickey's role a bit so that it hits more in that final reveal, among a few other things, because there are times it shows this was a bit rushed. Scream 2 is a very entertaining sequel that isn't on the exact same level as the first movie, but it comes pretty close. The fact it offers a bit more of the same does wind up being a little too repetitive in some areas, but for the most part, it allows for a lot more fun, slick meta commentary mixed with a great whodunit storyline and bits of dark comedy thrown in there. It's a fun time overall, and another worthy addition to this franchise. Scream 2 gets an 8 out of 10. So stay tuned. Up next will be my review of Scream 3. And in the meantime, let me know, did you see Scream 2 or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you like this just as much as the original, more than the original? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and keep having fun with film.